Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to the Word of the Day podcast. My name is Jamie Silva, I am your host, and I am ready to pleasantly explain the same word as last time to you all. This, of course, would be the adjective impolitic. If you haven't listened to part 1 of this special 2-part feature, do go back and listen to that, because we're just going to pick up right where we left off last time. But first, let's welcome back to the program, here for what I guess is technically her second appearance, the very talented voice actor Laurel. Laurel, great to have you here again. Excuse me?
That's Russian for the classic communist slogan, "Workers of the world unite." I thought it was the perfect greeting for the Soviet Word of the Day podcast.
Thank you, comrade.
Пожалуйста.
Means
you're welcome.
Well, this show is off to a great start. Maybe I should just have Paige on instead.
This is Paige?
What?
No, I'm just messing with you, man. It's me, Laurel, obviously.
Nothing is obvious with you two. Okay, look, I'm just going to get into the material, okay? At the end of part 1, folks, we were talking about how smiling at non-friends and family was pretty rare in Soviet times and considered pretty suspicious, and how this is even the case in contemporary Russia to a large extent. Now, I'm no sociologist or psychologist, and there are many competing and complementary theories out there about why Russians wear rather grim countenances. But in my own amateur economisty opinion, I think the Soviet economic system contributed to this. See, when the economy is arranged in such a way where you don't have an incentive to be nice to people you otherwise wouldn't really care much about, as we talked about last time, then a lot fewer people would likely take the trouble to be nice to those random, non-family folks that you encounter in daily life. And, you know, Laurel, I have a rather cynical saying that goes...
Another one?
Well, look, it's an edifying aphorism, okay? The listeners, they'll learn from it. Are you trying to be impolitic on purpose again?
No. I just think it's probably impolitic for you to make your listeners sad and cynical.
I'm sure they'll get over it. Okay, so here's the cynical saying. Most people do 2 things in life. What they have to and what they can get away with.
Oh my God.
This means that if you don't have to be nice and you can get away with being kind of surly, well then why would you bother being nice? It's just a waste of emotional labor. So if basically nobody does, then over time, if someone is nice to non-family/close friends, and heaven forbid, they smile at them, then these people stick out in society. They seem weird. They seem dumb or untrustworthy.
Sure, but I think it's worth noting that smiley culture has drawbacks of its own, such as, like, an apparent lack of sincerity and the stress of putting in the emotional labor and effort of being nice when you'd rather not be to people you may not care much for.
Fair enough. But for better or worse, I think smiling is more likely to be a cultural norm in more free market-oriented societies, based squarely on the understanding that it is typically unwise, it is imprudent, it is impolitic to be surly and frowny to people that you have to do business with.
Frowny?
Yeah, like a frowny face.
Like the emoji.
Exactly.
I don't think frowny can stand alone as an adjective, though.
Well, smiley is a standalone adjective, so...
What, is it?
Yeah, Google defines smiley as, quote, smiling or cheerful, unquote.
Huh. Well, I suppose I'll allow it.
What do you mean you'll allow it? Laurel, last time I checked, I was the host of this here podcast.
Well, I listen to this here podcast.
So?
So that means I'm a listener, which is basically like a customer, right? And well, didn't we say last time that in capitalist free market countries, the customer is always right?
Oh no.
And last I checked, we were recording this in the good old US of A.
You've thought of everything, Laurel. Gosh, I feel trapped.
Hey, don't be all frowny about it, Jamie. Cheer up. It's a new word. I thought you were supposed to be a fan of those.
You're right, Laurel, aka customer. I am a fan of new words. Neologisms, they're called. And we talked about those in episode 24. Do you remember where we were? I have no recollection.
Oh yeah, I got it. All right, folks, for a broader view of impolitic, you can really apply the same logic to tons of professions, people, and situations. In each one, you can ask, who would it be imprudent to upset? Well, the word impolitic would apply to any action or words that might unwisely anger that person or people.
So, for a very incomplete list, sports players wouldn't want to anger the referee, and politicians wouldn't want to offend their constituents, lest they get voted out.
What about someone who stands to inherit a sum of money from an aging relative and therefore wouldn't want to get on their bad side?
Wow, who's sad and cynical now, huh?
What? This happens. It's a real thing. It's happened to me.
Wait, what?
I don't want to talk about it, Jamie. I should be on a yacht right now.
I'm so sorry.
Thanks. But fine. A couple less morbid examples might be, say, how a student wouldn't want to antagonize their professors, and how it's basically always imprudent to annoy your housemates or the people you live with.
Very good. Now, you could get into questions of relative social or political power here, right? And say, like, if you have to watch your tongue around someone and act all professional and polite because they could harm you somehow if you crossed them, then that means they must have power over you in some way, and your relationship is therefore unequal. And this is true to an extent in a lot of situations. Very few relationships are entirely equal, and certainly they're not that way all the time. But I think this is too simple. In a ton of cases, both parties have at least some power, even if there are hierarchies lurking in the background.
Okay, so like, as long as the less powerful person can still make some sort of trouble for the more powerful person, or just be tougher to get along with, or work with, or be around, then it's also impolitic for the ostensibly more powerful person to cross them. Maybe less so than the reverse, but it's not nothing, right?
Right. Harkening back once again to Ginny's and my discussion of ingratiate in episode 102, you could say that a boss has power over their employees. But the employees have some power too. If, say, they become resentful and unmotivated because they don't like the manager or the company culture or what have you, even if they're not actively sabotaging things, they probably don't do their work quite as well. Or maybe they'd just up and quit. And then the team's performance might suffer, and then their boss might look bad in front of their boss, etc. So rather than a purely hierarchical relationship where the employees have to be nice to the manager but not vice versa, I think it's more of an interdependent relationship where both sides have some incentive to be careful about saying or doing impolitic things.
Yep, that totally makes sense. And going back to what you said before about how impolitic can be relevant even in relatively equal, non-hierarchical relationships, it really makes me wonder, like, is it possible to do something impolitic towards a friend or family member?
Interesting thought, Laurel. Expound on that, if you would.
Yeah, so take the family scenario. It seems weird to say that it would be impolitic to be mean to your sister, right? Like, what's she gonna do? Fire you from the family? And also, hopefully, you're just being nice to each other anyway, as a default, because you're family and you love each other, not because you're fearful of what could happen if you cross each other.
That is how it should work, Laurel. But, well, you come from a largish family yourself, right? With 4 siblings. So, in your experience, would you say this is always how it works? Or would you say that there were occasionally little power struggles, battles of will, tit for tats, times when you might have mulled over the consequences of angering this or that sibling? And before you answer, let me give you an example from my experience. Like, I think a common dynamic is that the oldest child tends to have a bit more power than the rest of the kids, right? Like, they're probably bigger, stronger, smarter, and crucially, the oldest is probably more skilled at communicating their desires to the true power center of the household, that being the parents. So I can say that in my family, if my oldest brother was babysitting us other kids while my parents were out and about, the risk of, quote-unquote, getting a bad report based on poor behavior was a powerful incentive to heed his, let's just say, reasonable and fair instructions when he was in charge. So in that setting, I think it was pretty clearly impolitic of us to disobey him or cross him, even though, obviously, we were still siblings and still cared about each other. Is this all making sense?
Yeah, it totally is. I mean, as an oldest sibling myself...
Well, not exactly, right? I mean, Paige is your twin, so aren't you sort of both oldest?
I mean, if you want to get technical, Paige is the oldest by 8 minutes. But you know what, Jamie? It's actually very impolitic to ask a twin if they're the oldest.
Oh, is it?
It is indeed. Quote unquote, younger twins absolutely hate that question. And asking it puts you in the doghouse faster than you can say, are you guys identical then?
You don't like that question either, do you?
I do not. Oh, and by the way, it was also impolitic for Paige to consistently remind me of her elder twin status throughout, let's see here. Yep, our entire lives. It's like, Jamie, if you and I found out we were born on the same day, would you agree that we were the same age? Or would you ask me what time I was born so we could truly determine who was the oldest down to the minute?
The, second one?
Wrong answer.
Oh my. It feels like I opened a real Pandora's box there. You want to just move on?
Perhaps we should. Yeah. Okay. Basically, folks, if you ever stop and think to yourself, oh, I better not do this or better not say that, I don't want to upset this person, well, that means you were about to do or say something impolitic and just caught yourself in time. Like, for example, I was just talking to producer Pete before the show, and he said to me, he was like, hey, Laurel, I've been in this business a long time, and I think you'd be such a good host. For sure you'd do a better job than Jamie. Between you and me, I think the word of the day headquarters is looking around for a replacement host right now. Maybe you should look into it and submit a resume or something.
Producer Pete said all that? To you?
Mm-hmm. Oh, he's so sweet, right? Oh, and then he said, you know, Laurel, best keep this between you and me. It would be very impolitic if Jamie heard about it.
Impolitic for sure. Also, I am the headquarters for this show. I don't know what he's talking about.
Oh, so would I submit my replacement host resume to you then, or?
Laurel, we are not accepting applications for a new host at this time.
Ugh, bummer. I don't know. I think producer Pete really saw some great potential in me, though. I feel like I could.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Laurel, for your interest. HQ will be in touch soon, I'm sure. Not. Okay. So, at long last, folks, and what a struggle it's been, it's now time to get some examples of how to use impolitic in ordinary conversation or writing. Laurel, lead us off, if you would.
Sure. Okay, example number 1. I don't like these Brussels sprouts, said Charlotte. They're too mushy, Mama. You overcooked them. This was a very impolitic remark. Oh, overcooked are they? Said her mother. Well, Charlotte, I'm so sorry. I just must be a terrible cook. In that case, I won't bother subjecting you to the apple tart I baked this afternoon. I'm sure I overcooked that too.
Example number 2. Jacqueline didn't see why her fiancé Carlos had to invite all his law school friends to their wedding, which was supposed to be rather on the small side. But Carlos said it would be impolitic not to invite them, since otherwise they might feel slighted and show up at the ceremony anyway. And then, when the officiant asked if anyone saw any reason why these two should not be wed, they might all stand up and start shouting, "Objection, Your Honor," leading the witnesses.
Wow, what a rhubarb. And that's episode 68. Example number 3 comes from Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, a personal favorite of mine. Slightly edited for clarity because Austen used some very fancy language. Quote, Elizabeth laughed heartily at the picture of herself that Mr. Darcy's reply painted, and said to Colonel Fitzwilliam, Your cousin will teach you not to believe a word I say. I am particularly unlucky in meeting with a person so able to expose my real character. Indeed, Mr. Darcy, it is very ungenerous of you to say such things, and, give me leave to say, very impolitic too, for it is provoking me to retaliate, and such things may come out as will shock your relations to hear.
And finally, example number 3 comes from Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen, also a personal favorite of mine, and once again, lightly edited for clarity. In the following selection, Austen pokes fun at a literary fashion of her day, wherein authors of novels would disparage novels and people who read novels, right there in the pages of their novels. Quote, The progress of the friendship between Catherine and Isabella was as quick as its beginning had been warm. They called each other by their Christian names, which just means their first names. So like extra familiar, extra friendly. Continuing. They were always arm in arm when they walked, pinned up each other's trains for the dance, and if a rainy morning deprived them of other enjoyments, they were still resolute in meeting in defiance of wet and dirt, and shut themselves up to read novels together. Yes, novels, for I will not adopt that ungenerous and impolitic custom so common with novel writers, of degrading by their contemptuous censure the very books that they are themselves writing, joining with their greatest enemies in bestowing the harshest epithets on such works, and scarcely ever permitting them to be read by their own heroine, who, if she ever accidentally takes up a novel, is sure to turn over its insipid pages in disgust. Unquote. Okay, I think that'll do it for the examples, and that'll do it for today's show. Thank you all very much for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. And we hope our discussion of this useful word helps you say fewer impolitic things to your parents, managers, peers, etc.
Or you can say more impolitic things. It can be fun. Try it.
Laurel, first, thank you for being on the show.
My pleasure.
And second, I'm going to ask that you stick around for a little bit afterwards and have a little chat with HR about what it is appropriate to tell listeners to do.
I thought I didn't work here.
Yeah, I know, but still. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been another edition of the Word of the Day podcast. I'm your host,
For now,
Jamie Silva. We hope you tune in again next time. And until then, as always, have a great